Okay, so I haven't actually planned this video. I'm going completely off script here. I did have one all queued up to record for today, and usual thing, interruptions, delays, it kind of got late in the day and I'm just too tired to focus on something where I'm actually trying to analyse or discuss an analysis, anything like that. So I thought this would be probably a good opportunity to just basically go off script a little bit and basically discuss questions that I have or observations I have. So we've heard the most recent Janie audio where she's basically saying, well, when the kids are found and they're alive, all these content creators are going to look really stupid and you're going to be really embarrassed and you're all going to lose your channels. Now this to me is just an example of how hard both sides are suddenly playing to convince people of their innocence. I think that after the RCMP came out in December and January and kind of showed their cards, or some of their cards a little bit, that people are starting to become nervous because they suddenly realise that things could become real and that there really could be arrests coming down the track. Now, we had Daniel come out with that final attempt not long after the redactions were lifted, where he was basically trying to once again convince people of his innocence, once again gaslight people into believing that, hey, he's done nothing wrong. And of course, to try and convince people once again that the children are alive, they're hidden somewhere by Malaya. Of course, then he got arrested and suddenly he went silent. So it seems like Janie has stepped up to the mark. But the surprising thing is that all of a sudden we have people from Malaya's side of the family starting to speak. Kind of. So you had that interview with Cheryl and Angeline. And what's interesting there is that we're now discovering that while Cody did meet Angeline a few times when she popped into the house, he never met Cheryl. He'd never even heard of Cheryl. And we know that Cheryl hadn't actually had any interaction with Malaya after Malaya and Daniel got together. So it seems like Hayley is correct in saying that actually Cheryl and Malaya weren't even friends until the children went missing. But now apparently Cheryl is Malaya's fiercest advocate. Now Malaya still hasn't come out and spoken for herself. However, she's found a content creator who is sympathetic towards her and who is therefore willing to fight the fight for her. And of course, because of that, we are now expected to believe that Malaya is entirely innocent when it comes to the disappearance of her children. That she knew absolutely nothing. And that it's just a coincidence that her and Daniel's stories are so identical that her and Daniel contradict each other. That she left the property on the day after the children were reported missing. Now, I think it's fair to say that after Malaya left the property, yes, Daniel and Janie did start out with a rather intensive campaign to throw all the blame onto Malaya. And there was a period of time for probably about the first month or so where so many people believed that Daniel was innocent and Malaya was guilty because after all, Daniel was the one coming out and speaking in front of the cameras. What a lot of people weren't recognising was that this is someone who has to be in control of the situation. So for him, coming out and talking to the media allowed him to have control of the narrative to try and convince people that they needed to look at Malaya, not at him. Because after all, hey, look at me, I'm the only person that's speaking out for Jack and Lily. Even after Belinda decided that what the heck she's going to come out publicly and speak out for her grandchildren, even after then, Daniel was still coming out and saying, look at me, I'm the only person speaking out for Jack and Lily. And honestly, I was surprised at some of the people who actually believed Daniel's innocence. So I remember Sunny on her channel talking about the messages that Malaya had sent to Belinda. And one of those messages had something to do with Daniel and saying he should be out searching for her children. Or something along those lines. I haven't got that in front of me, but I do remember it was a comment that Malaya had made with regards to, well, Daniel should be searching for her children, which, according to Sunny, meant that it showed that somehow that Daniel was innocent, and it put it back on Malaya. And I can't remember what the logic was there. But to me, it seemed like deflection. To me, that was the first sign that actually maybe Malaya is a little bit more calculating than what we had thought. Because I think a few people looked at that interview that she did and thought, yeah, she's a bit quiet and, maybe she is a little bit naive. Maybe there's a bit of a background in terms of a bad relationship between her and Daniel, because we heard her make that comment of I said to him, my partner, Daniel, and the way she said it sounded like it was so painful for her to say his name. And I remember back then thinking, okay, there's something not right here. But there definitely were things that were said in Malaya's messages to Belinda that made me start to think, actually, I think this could be someone who is extremely manipulative and is very good at convincing people that she's this poor, quiet, sweet, innocent individual. But even when I read her statement that she gave to Please Bring Me Home, I couldn't shake the thought that this is someone who is actually incredibly cunning, incredibly manipulative, and puts on this front of being poor, helpless me. She allows other people to do things for her because that allows her to play the innocent doe. Look at me, I'm so defenceless. Hayley spoke about her conversation with Malaya at the house or in the driveway, where Malaya claimed that she had discovered around the time that Meadow was being born that actually Daniel was into drugs. And the way we hear it from Hayley makes it sound like Malaya was trying to give the impression that she wasn't touching drugs, it was all Daniel. Well, based on the things that she's said in her statement for Please Bring Me Home, I can't help thinking that this is the statement of someone who basically was probably using drugs just as much as Daniel was, but didn't want to be seen in a bad light by family members. So basically was like, yeah, you know what? He did this, it makes him such a bad person. So by adding that value judgment to it, people wouldn't turn around and question if she was also doing drugs herself. Now, we don't know if she was or wasn't, but she certainly seems to have the sort of personality where she will go running to her mother and telling her mother, such and such is doing a bad thing. I was with my friend today and you know what? They were smoking. Because she's come into the house smelling of cigarettes and she preempts the fact that her mother's going to smell that. So she comes in and says, I was with my friends and they were smoking. To try and act innocent, to try and act that, I have these morals, I understand what's right and wrong, so I'm telling you that I recognise that these people have done the wrong thing, but I'm a good person, I would never do these wrong things. That is the sort of personality that I'm seeing in Malaya from what we know of her. I don't believe that Cindy really knows anything about what happened to the children. As a mother, I suspect that she does have major suspicions. And I would imagine that she probably does suspect Malaya has had a role in this. But you can bet that Malaya has played innocent with her entire family for the past 12 months, 11, 12 months. Now, I don't know how much Cheryl knows, but I think Cheryl's got a pretty good idea that Malaya is not so innocent. because we've seen some pretty dirty stunts from Cheryl in the last couple of months. I know some people keep questioning, how can you be sure that this cease and desist comes from Cheryl? Cheryl herself admitted to it in a Facebook chat. I have seen messages or Facebook messages written by Cheryl where she uses the same language, the same deframed in what she's saying in a post. So, things like that tend to make you think that yes, she is at the core of this. If she believes Malaya is innocent, why isn't she speaking out more about the children? Why isn't she supporting Malaya to come out and speak about the children, supporting Malaya to come out and plead with people to help find the children? So that's one of the many things that make me think that Cheryl does know what's going on here. I suspect that Malaya may not have confided in her. I think Malaya has put on this act from day one of knowing absolutely nothing about what happened to the children, being completely innocent in the whole thing, and that she's maintained that with the people around her. I think that most recently she's played the DV card to elicit sympathy, and that people have somehow mistaken that with innocence. That because there were problems in her relationship with Daniel, that makes her the victim in all this, and she couldn't possibly be connected in any way to the disappearance of her children. Well, yes, she has been a victim in terms of her relationship. But I will say this over and over again. When it comes to the disappearance of Lily and Jack, she is not a victim. She was one of 3 people on that property when those children went missing. And when we start to apply simple logic and critical thinking, then all 3 of those people on that property, at the very least, know what happened to those children. RCMP have made it really clear from the get-go that there is no sign whatsoever of an abduction. You have both sides trying to push this abduction narrative. But have you seen any of them come out pleading publicly for help from the public to find these children who they believe have been abducted? No. All they do is try and throw shade at each other and try and make people believe these half-cooked accusations against each other. So we have Malaya's side turning up at the courthouse with a sign on the car saying, give us Jack and Lily. Like, what? Do you think Daniel's got them locked in a cupboard somewhere? And then you have Janie and Daniel saying, well, the reason they're not terming it an abduction is because Malaya gave them to someone to hide them away. So that's not an abduction because she's their guardian and she handed them over. Like, oh my gosh. People believe this crap. If those children had been abducted, if they'd been handed over to someone, the RCMP would have wrapped this case up well and truly by now. And of course, to be still saying 11 months or 12 months down the track, no sign of an abduction, while at the same time essentially saying that the investigation is massive and that, essentially they've got reams and reams of evidence, which they haven't said that explicitly, but that's pretty much what they have been telling us in terms of all the interviews they've done, all the camera footage they've reviewed, all the tasks that have led to other tasks. Them saying that the investigation is still full speed ahead. If these children had been abducted and the RCMP are saying there's no sign of an abduction, they would have nothing to investigate. The children are not being hidden on a reserve somewhere. The children are not being hidden by someone who's close to Malaya. The children are not being hidden somewhere by Daniel. They've not been abducted. These are all things that we know for a fact. Unless, of course, you're off in La La Land and you believe Durwood. And yes, I listened to a little bit of that interview that the Foggy Lady did with that IT guy. I listened on double speed for the first half an hour where they didn't even get to talking about Lily and Jack. And then I listened to about 10 more minutes and realised that basically it was a load of BS. Now, I don't know if this guy is just someone who she knows, maybe he's friends with one of her children. Maybe she stumbled across him at the supermarket. But this guy has no knowledge of forensic investigations, digital or otherwise, when it comes to missing children. Not when it comes to criminal cases like this. And I'm just going to name it up. It is a criminal case. I also want to point out that when you do a Google search for this guy, the first thing that comes up, this guy that claims to be this world expert in his field, that has travelled around and trained FBI and all these other places, the first thing that comes up is a GoFundMe for him, because he wants people to pay for him to be able to work on developing a new program or something like that. If you're this highly successful person, you can afford to fund that yourself. And then in terms of the credentials, well, I kept searching for this guy, and what I found is that, and I'm going to use Farm Girl's term, he has built up a pyramid of credibility, in that there's all these different sites where you go to them and it just basically is a different site with a different name, and it just has about him and his credentials. There's 2 sites from seminars that he spoke at as a guest speaker. But so many seminars beforehand will put out for expressions of interest from speakers. Given the spiel that you read that he's put out on multiple websites, I would imagine he sounded quite credible to be a speaker at these conferences. But there's only 2 listings. This guy's supposed to be hugely successful. He also lists himself as a CEO of this company. When you look up that company, it's actually a company that used to be in existence, but has been absorbed by a much, much larger company. And this guy's name doesn't get mentioned anywhere. He claims to be a professor at a university, but then you discover that he used to be a professor at a community college. And then he talks about all these qualifications. He's got something like 50 to 70 qualifications. But when you dig a bit deeper, you find that a lot of those qualifications, I don't know how many, but apparently this other company that he had was basically giving qualifications to his students. He names this company and said, oh, this company very generously was giving qualifications to my students. Well, this company was a company that is basically under his name. So he was making up credentials and handing out credentials to his students and to himself. That is my observation, that is my belief from just that little bit of research I've done. But I've had people come and say, well, guess what? This guy thinks that from his expert knowledge that, yeah, the children are on a reserve somewhere. The guy knows jack all. Like, he is not a criminologist. He's not a criminal psychologist. He's someone who knows how to search the dark web to find predators. That's not someone who has the skills to actually know what's going on with this case, or the understanding of how cases like this are investigated. That's not anywhere near being within his scope of knowledge. But of course, Foggy had him come in because she's been pushing hard with her narrative of that the children were abducted. I think these multiple fake witnesses that have come on her channel, I can't help wondering if they're actually people that she knows who she got to come on to help her push her narrative. And I know there's a few of my listeners who still believe the children might be alive somewhere. And you're entitled to opinion. Feel free to share your reasons, your solid reasons for believing that. But for me, I just cannot believe that they could be alive still. Based on everything we know about the investigation, based on everything in the documents, based on everything that's been said by the 3 people that were on the property. Did they wander off into the woods? No. I know there's a few people who are still trying to push that as a possibility. And I'm just going to say an outright no. Being extremely familiar with the sort of technology that is used for these kind of searches, knowing that they had drones and helicopters up within a few hours with FLIR technology, that's your forward-facing infrared technology, as in heat-seeking technology. If the children had been anywhere within a 10-kilometre radius, they would have spotted them. Yes, they're saying that they covered I think it was originally a 3-kilometre radius or a 5-kilometre radius. But what people don't understand is that the drones and the helicopters have the capacity to cover a greater area. So they would have covered more than just the radius that the ground searchers were covering. They've also looked at footage from the helicopters, from the drones. And they've put that through software. And I showed you that with the Gus Lamont case, just how very thorough it is. There's no way they could have possibly missed them, in my opinion. So it seems highly unlikely, especially when we hear people who were on the ground who say there's no way those kids went up through those woods. There's no way, with all the stuff on the ground after Fiona, that those children wandered off into the woods. So that only leaves one possibility, and that is that those children left the property deceased, as in whatever happened on the property. So my question for those people who believe that Malaya is innocent, let's just start with Malaya for starters. My question for the people who believe that Malaya is innocent, how do you explain her stories matching with Janie's and Daniel's, given that the most logical answer here is that something happened to the children on the property when all 3 of those adults were there? How do you explain all the inconsistencies between all their stories, the contradictions between their stories? Because either none of them were involved in what happened to Lily and Jack, or all of them were. Because they are all covering for each other. When you listen to the way their stories intersect, when you listen to some of the instances where they inadvertently take on the same role in the narrative, or when they contradict each other, the times, the very specific times when none of them can come up with any solid details around that particular time. From Thursday afternoon onwards, none of them have anything solid that they can bring to the party. If I were to ask you to explain Malaya's timeline from the moment they returned to the property on the Thursday afternoon through till when the RCMP was called on Friday morning, it would be very difficult. We could say, okay, well, she had a FaceTime call with Cindy, and that was about 3 o'clock, I think it was. Well, okay, after that, what's the rest of her timeline for Thursday afternoon and Thursday evening? There's no timeline. She thinks the children may have gone outside to play at some point in time, but she's certain that they came inside before it was dark. There's nothing concrete about what the children did in the afternoon at all on Thursday after they finished that phone call with Cindy. She can't even settle onto what time they went to bed. It's like that phone call with Cindy. After that, Malaya and the children all went into a state of stasis, where basically they were just frozen in time, and time kept moving on while they just existed and didn't do anything. What did Malaya do on the Thursday afternoon while the children were maybe inside, maybe not? Because no housework was done. None of the clothes got pulled out of the bags from Paddy's place from the day before. So she didn't do any housework between, 4 o'clock and 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock. That's 5 hours where Malaya didn't do anything. 5 hours of a non-existent timeline. What did the children have for tea? What time did you give the children their dinner? You didn't put the children to bed till 9 or 10 o'clock. So there's a 5 or a 6 hour period from between when they spoke to Cindy and when they went to bed. But you didn't wash them, you didn't change their clothes. You don't even know if they were outside playing or not. You think they might have been, and you think they might have come in before dark. But you're not entirely certain. And Friday morning, well, your story matches Daniel's too much. You both were the ones drifting out of sleep, and Lily poked her head in and out a few times, while the other person was sound asleep. And you both were the ones that woke your partner up. Why is it that Malaya marked the children absent at about 20 to past 6 in the morning, but apparently never checked on them? Why is it that there was a missed phone call from her at 8:28, which is allegedly when she was asleep with Daniel and Meadow, and the children were out playing unsupervised? And why say in the 911 call that the children were prone to wander? And then in your interview with RCMP after they arrived, say the children were not known to wander? Which one is it? Why talk about pain and sorrow on day 2? Because sorrow is what someone feels when they have lost someone permanently, when someone has died. You know, she said in that interview, not long before she basically left the whole area, she said, not that they could be abducted, but they could. Meaning that in that interview, just before she went to the briefing, she wasn't sold on this idea of them having been abducted. In fact, when you listen to the interview, it sounds like she didn't think that was a possibility. So that would only leave 2 possibilities. One, that the children are still lost in the woods somewhere, or that they're deceased and she knows they're deceased. So she goes to the briefing, has a panic attack, and leaves with her mother. And this is only a short while after, and we've heard that that interview was done in the afternoon, because I think it was Hayley mentioned it, or Cheryl mentioned it, or Logan, one of them mentioned that the interview was in the afternoon before the briefing. So within a matter of hours, she's gone from being not convinced that they were abducted, but just saying that they should do an Amber Alert anyway, just in case, to being so certain that it's okay to just leave the property where your children are missing. I mean, at the end of the day, the only way you could be certain of an abduction is if there was some sign of an abduction. And then maybe you would feel happier going and staying with your mother if your relationship was rocky. But there's no sign of an abduction. How many times have the RCMP told that? So if there was no sign of an abduction, as a mother, you're not going to leave the property. Not if there's a possibility that your children are lost in the woods. That only leaves one scenario. That scenario being she knew they were deceased. She knew there was no reason to stay there because they weren't coming back. And then why, after fleeing from the property, did she block Belinda, the grandmother of the children? If you thought that your children were missing in the woods, or if you thought that they'd been abducted, what reason would you have to block the grandmother of your children with whom you used to have a good relationship? The only reason she blocked Belinda the only thing I can think of there was guilt. Because she knew that her children weren't alive. And she felt guilt over that, so she blocked Belinda because she didn't want to have to deal with Belinda. And then there was the silence. The first we hear from her after her doing a runner is when Cheryl comes out and wants a piece of the GoFundMe money when they were trying to raise money for awareness. And then she goes silent again until Chrissy Travers leaks the statement that she wrote for Please Bring Me Home. That wasn't intended as a public statement. That wasn't Malaya writing a statement to share with the public. That was Malaya writing a statement that she shared with Please Bring Me Home that got leaked and shared around. I heard recently someone going, well, you know, parents all deal with these things differently, so her silence, you shouldn't hold it against her. But we're talking about her being silent for almost a year. Even now, she's not coming out and doing any interviews with anyone. She's still speaking through other people. She's had time to go through multiple phases of grief or worry or dealing with the situation. She would not be in the same emotional state that she was when the children first went missing. So why has she not come out at any point in time and made a plea with the public for help finding her children? That to me says that she knows that they're not abducted, they're not lost in the wood, and she doesn't want them found because she realises that she is also responsible for what happened. She may not have done anything physically, but she was there and she clearly helped cover for whatever happened. Although we have heard that she could become a very aggressive, violent drunk. I don't believe for 1 minute that she did physically do anything to those children, but there's always that consideration, knowing that she became physically violent with Cody when she got drunk. And why is it, after being so adamant in her statement with Please Bring Me Home that she was convinced the children were still alive, why is it that apparently Cheryl was the one who was fighting to get those billboards up to get awareness for the children being missing, why is it then that she's suddenly out searching the woods, which shows acceptance that they are not alive? That directly contradicts everything she's been trying to convince people of for this whole 11, 12 months. So what about Janie? Janie had nothing to do with it. She wasn't in that trailer. What happens in that trailer is none of her business. This is what she's told us. She heard the children on the Friday morning. And of course from there, the story goes on to make it look like Malaya is guilty of something. She found Malaya standing out on the driveway with Meadow. And something wasn't right there. And Malaya's like, they're missing. And Janie's like, how long? Well, Janie's story has so many holes in it, so much leakage. Her story for Thursday afternoon doesn't quite gel. There's holes in the story. And there's a lot of things that she says that are suggestive of someone who was aware that something wasn't right and didn't act on it. Janie really didn't like Lily and Jack. She didn't like Malaya. And yet she's adopted Belinda's line, trying to say, well, I know in my heart that they're still alive. And saying that Belinda's a bad grandmother because she believes they're not alive. Serious gaslighting there. But Janie and Daniel have both tried so hard over the last 11 months to convince people that everyone needs to look at Malaya. Do your research. Have a look at Malaya. Ask Malaya. But neither Janie or Daniel have got anything solid for Thursday afternoon or Friday morning either. In fact, when you look at Janie's narrative for Thursday afternoon and for Friday morning, it seems to all blend together. So that if I were to take one part of that narrative and tell you that one single part of her narrative, you would struggle to remember whether that was Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, that particular part. Because it seems like she's taken one singular narrative and then kind of stretched it out to make it into two narratives, but it still pretty much sounds the same. Janie continuously brings everything back to, don't look at us. We didn't kill the children. We're not responsible for what happened to the children. Her language keeps pointing to something that happened, a singular moment on that property. We get Janie and Daniel both expressing resentment of Malaya ringing 911. And they disguise that with, oh, because she made this bad choice and she panicked and rang 911, even though she'd organised for someone to take the children. Well, when you look at Daniel when he's talking about Malaya calling 911, you can see signs of contempt in his body language. It seems like Malaya broke from the agreement and that she wasn't meant to call 911 that early. But Janie and Daniel would like you to believe that the mistake was Malaya getting authorities involved when she was only trying to get the children away from the property. And all this escalated because she called 911 and now she's too scared to bring her children back out into the public because she's going to get into trouble. Like, BS. What a ridiculous narrative. And people still believe that. There's no logic to that whatsoever. If those children were still alive somewhere, the RCMP would have found them. But Janie and Daniel have both worked so hard over the last 11 months or so to try and lead people just close enough to making their own conclusion of Malaya being responsible for the children being missing, of Malaya having organised for someone to take them and hide them. They don't explicitly say it, although Janie's been getting closer and closer to that, and most recently she is just throwing all caution to the wind. But at the end of the day, 90%, even 95% of everything we've heard from Daniel and Janie has been with the intention of convincing people they are innocent and they know nothing. They had no involvement, with the intention of convincing people that Malaya is responsible. On the other hand, we have Malaya's side trying to convince people that Daniel is responsible. The level of manipulation that's been going on over the last 11 months with all these sock accounts, all these fake accounts. And now we hear that you have allegedly Cheryl pretending to be this lawyer using the name Michael James, and it makes you wonder if these other names that have been popping up on like Facebook and in people's YouTube channels, like the Michelle James or Lily Jack and things like that, are also creations from Cheryl. How many accounts does this woman use to try and push a narrative on behalf of Malaya? How many accounts does Daniel have? Why are there so many stunts from both sides? Because if these people were truly innocent, if they didn't know what happened to Lily and Jack, they wouldn't be putting so much energy into discrediting people from the other side, putting so much energy into trying to silence content creators, putting so much energy into trying to make people stop talking about the case. We've heard Daniel say this should all be over by now. We've heard Daniel and Janie both express they just want it to be over, they want it all to go away. Malaya, by her very actions, clearly wants it all to just go away. It seems like the only people who want us to keep talking about Lily and Jack, the only people who really want to find out what happened to Lily and Jack, are people like Hayley, Belinda, Chaucer. But the people who were closest to these children at the time that they went missing, they just want us to all shut up and go away. Is that really what you would expect of innocent people? Even before I started my channel, I've been following true crime cases since watching Kendall Ray's video that she did on Abby and Libby back in September of 2019. So that's, 6.5 years I've been following cases on YouTube. I mean, even before then, I was following the case of Kristen Smart since day one, back in the 90s. I dug deep into the Lindy Chamberlain case, which is the dingo case here in Australia. That was something that occurred when I was quite young, something that really impacted on me, and something that I did do a lot of reading or watching videos on over the years because I had that interest. So I'm not new to these sorts of cases. I'm not new to true crime. I couldn't tell you how many of Emma Kenny's videos I have watched. But pretty much up until when I just became too busy with my channel to watch her content consistently, I had pretty much watched all her content. And she has hundreds and hundreds of videos out. Same with Kendall Ray. Up until when I became too busy with my channel, I had watched pretty much all her content. And that's just two creators. I followed Grizzly from when she started covering Gabby's case, when her channel was only a few months old. I'm not new to any of this. So when I say that I have never seen innocent parents who just vanish for 11, 12 months the way Malaya has, I'm not basing this on one or two cases. Yes, some parents might not come out and speak in front of the camera, but they still go on social media. They still post on Facebook or on Instagram. They might do interviews with media where they're like, we don't want to be on camera, just do it as a news article. But when a parent or a guardian is completely silent and hiding out for 11 or 12 months, I have never seen a case where that has occurred and that person has not been involved in some way. If Janie, Daniel, Malaya all expect us to believe that they are innocent in this, all expect us to believe that they had nothing to do with the disappearance of the children, how about if they come out publicly and, just for starters, start actually speaking on behalf of the children as opposed to on behalf of themselves, or in Malaya's case, not at all? And how about if they come out and clarify some of the many, many, many questions that have been left unanswered because they don't want people to ask these questions, and they don't want people to keep focusing on the case. So how about if they truly are innocent, if they start acting innocent and come out and speak publicly for Lily and Jack, not for themselves. We've heard enough of them speaking for themselves or having someone speak for them. But we're still waiting after nearly a year for just one of those individuals to come out and speak on behalf of Lily and Jack. For just one of those individuals to come out and make a real public plea for help to find those children. The only person we've seen acting in what I would consider to be a normal way over missing children is Belinda. Yes, Hayley, when she's come out, definitely appears to be a concerned aunt. Chelsea doesn't put herself front and centre, but she's there every day, supporting Belinda and speaking out on behalf of her niece and nephew. But the people who were on the property, nothing. All they are concerned with is getting people to not talk about them, getting people to not pay attention to them, to putting out false cease and desists, to trying to intimidate people by saying, you're all going to lose your channels. Those 3 people that were on the property when these children went missing, not one of them have acted in a way that would make me think that they were even close to being innocent in all of this.